there is so much power in stories, right? And there's so much connections that you can build, and it's very obvious. But what prevents people from telling more stories? What have you discovered there?
First is people there are several ways. One is not knowing where to find stories,
Correct.
but the other one is you worry about being judged by other people, not by strangers,
Right.
but by the people you know.
Correct.
Because when you share personal stories, it's normally not just about you, but it's
Correct.
also about your friends, your
Correct.
family, things that are very meaningful for you.
Right.
And it's basically you're showing all your soft tender bits, the ones that maybe like that scar that's just starting to heal,
Correct.
that's starting to grow the hardened skin, but it's still there. And so that's where you feel more vulnerable. And I think that's one thing that people don't want to share because like, we and I think the pandemic made us much more um guarded as well.
Yes.
Like we're afraid to connect. But the thing is everybody's lonely, but I find people are more open to strangers than they are to people they know.
Correct, correct, correct. You're right. Absolutely, absolutely. Now, how can this scene in the corporate storytelling or business
Yes.
storytelling? So, what are you seeing as gaps there? Because there are some people who just motivate you with their stories, but then there's a whole lot of people. It does not mean that they don't have stories. They're all like the hidden introverts, or there's hidden heroes, if we call them that,
Yeah.
right? How do you bring them to tell their stories out?
So it depends. So sometimes I select themes. So when I work with corporations, normally we decide on like before, like the first time I did, they go, "Oh, we'll do a career story, like why you do what you do and why it matters, because it gives everybody a sense of purpose." But then when my clients came to watch my show and they saw how open and more vulnerable the storytellers were, they go, "We want those kinds of stories for our team. We want them to be able to connect in that way. It's a much more meaningful way." So we chose other themes. So, like one of the themes we chose was the theme on lessons.
Correct.
Everybody has learned a lesson at some point in their life, whether it's in your youth or as an adult. And so I had them like they think about it like what are the lessons, and some people find it easier to share something that they've learned during their childhood, and because it's a lesson, right, you've
Correct.
already gotten past it.
Correct.
So it's like kind of like a baby first step. But
Correct.
when I've done some one-on-one session with some of these, they have a lot more powerful stories underneath it, but they're still afraid to share
Correct.
because of judgment.
Correct.
Like I've worked so hard to get this far. I don't want them to see that I was once quite weak. But my point to them is, but if you don't share, there's a little girl out there who might be afraid to try because she's never heard your story.
Correct.
So, but I can't force people to tell their stories. But so I told them like, but once they're ready, I told them like I would love to feature them or have them share their stories because, but it's still up to them to decide when they're ready to open up. Because I've realized this is something that you cannot force people to do. They have to take that first step themselves.
Sure, absolutely. And in a world where everybody is talking and nobody is listening, how do you make our stories stand out so that people can listen? What is your thoughts around this?
So I think there will always be people whose messages I think will resonate and land. I think we have to create platforms for that. So, I know there's a lot of noise out there, so that's why I created my show as a platform. I filter through people's stories, but I also create an open space for people to submit their stories to me. So I'm not just saying like, oh, I don't like your story, but I ask people to submit. And then from there I look at it and try to find the gems because sometimes what I normally get is the story they propose,
Correct.
the story behind that story is the real story.
Correct.
And so sometimes I help them dig it. Help them dig it out. And I think through the noise, it's like there are people who will always gravitate towards your message, but it's also I think it's a matter of timing
Correct.
when you whatever it is that you post would land. And that's kind of like what pushes me to continue doing what I'm doing is that I if I stop creating this space, then there's no space for people to share their voices. And
Correct.
so I know that I have like a certain group of people who do follow what I'm doing, and they said like, as long as you keep producing, we'll keep telling stories.
Correct. Okay. So it looks like you need the right catalyst or the right safety net for people to keep telling stories, right? So I think both catalyst is also required and a
Yes.
safety net is also required so that people are comfortable, they feel safe and secure to
Yes.
start sharing stories.
When it comes to personal narratives, I think creating psychological safety is
Mhm.
very important
Correct.
for people to want to open up, and also for people to want to create bonds, because it's like kind of like lowering your guard and like extending that, putting lowering down your drawbridge, right,
Correct.
across the moat to build to bridge the gap,
Correct.
and then you're inviting somebody else to help bridge the gap with you.
Correct. Correct.